I'm Anders Wallgren, formerly CTO of Electric Cloud, now VP of Technology Strategy at CloudBees, because CloudBees acquired Electric Cloud a few weeks ago. But I haven't changed the branding or any of that stuff, so probably I'll have to go to the marketing jail after I'm done with this. So I'm going to talk about, really just kind of DevOps and a little bit about how we can structure teams and structure work and do sharing and really use pipelines as executable value streams to kind of cut to the chase there and how to do this stuff. And a little bit of context. I mean, Mark Andreessen famously said a few years ago, software is eating the world. You know, there isn't a single industry anymore that isn't driven, innovated by, dominated by software. I mean, appliances, cars, everything that used to be sort of all just hardware and metal is now very much about software. And if you look at it sort of from a financial perspective, you go back to 2001 and look at the largest companies by market cap in the industry. One of them was a technology company, Microsoft. Now 3 years ago, all of them are technology companies, and that's just sort of one sign of the, kind of how much software is really dominating what we're doing in all industries. And really, in some ways, when we talk about DevOps, or talking about building versus running software, there are competing concerns, right? On the dev side of the house, change is the status quo. We want to innovate, we want to bring new functionality, we want to create value for our customers, we want to be able to experiment, move fast, use whatever the best tool is for each job. We want to be able to refactor and simplify and innovate, right? On the other, which is all good stuff, right? On the other side of the house, kind of the ops side of the house, we want to, status quo is the status quo. We want to keep the lights on and the money coming in, right? Very important. Does you no good to release the most awesome application in the world if it goes down every 5 minutes, or if it can't be maintained, can't be run, all of those kinds of things. So in the ops world, it's a lot about managing change, making things repeatable, approvals, SLAs, standards, scaling, performance, all of those kinds of things. And so these are, in some ways, kind of different goals, right? Different skill sets, different organizations, different cultures, very much so. So how do we kind of make that work? Well, here's what's kind of happened over the years, and if you love I Love Lucy as much as I do, you'll probably recognize this little video in the background here where they're working on the assembly line and the chocolates are coming out faster than they can package them. So this is sort of, this is what's happening between dev and ops, I would say, since Agile. Right? Now, Agile, if you go read the manifesto, talks very explicitly about it's all about delivering value to customers, delivering software to customers. But in practicality, what's happened is that it's been about developers, QA, product owners, product managers, and much less about ops. And so we've managed to increase the velocity at which we deliver functionality out of engineering, and this is what DevOps is a lot about, is how do we absorb that into ops? How do we make it run? And how do we do this without breaking things too badly? And DevOps is really about that, right? And so this is kind of the CAMS acronym that everybody talks a lot about: culture, automation, measurement, sharing. Sharing being probably one of the biggest things in terms of what we need to think about, and as I'll talk about a little bit here. We need to have shared goals, make sure we're all working towards the same kind of thing, which is deliver value for customers. And if we deliver value for customers, they'll give us whatever it is we're looking for in return, money, love, respect, whatever. Shared visibility across all of the different organizations. And this isn't just about dev and ops, right? This is dev, QA, the line of business, HR, finance, right? If we're changing how we do business, we're changing how we're funding that. We're changing how we evaluate people in their performance and all of those kinds of things. So DevOps transformations that focus only on dev or QA or ops and ignore all of these things are doomed to fail, because they're going to be operating in the same environment that they were operating in before, trying to apply different rules to it, and there's going to be a lot of conflict there. And then really just kind of shared control between all of these things, and having disposable on-demand resources and services and so on that we can operate on a lot quicker. So I'm going to cut right to the chase here and kind of tell you what I'm going to tell you, right? 3 things that I'm going to talk about today: mapping and modeling the value stream as a pipeline. Automatically then tracking the pipeline performance as a result of that, and then making that pipeline available as a service to all of your teams. Those are really the 3 things I'm going to talk about today, starting with the value stream. So Has anybody here ever done a value stream mapping exercise? Okay, everybody talk to that guy afterwards and he'll tell you how cool it is, I think, hopefully, right? Thank you, here's your $5. So value stream mapping, and there's a ton of different ways to do it, but really what it's all about is, and this is one of our customers, and these guys spoke at the Devops Enterprise Summit a few years ago, get everybody in the same room and understand your path to production, right? Really understand from the second that you have an idea to when that idea is creating value for the customer, what are all the things that go into that, right? And value stream mapping exercises in particular has a lot to do with, Post-it notes and, a very interactive exercise. And every time I go through this or watch a customer go through this, there's tons of aha moments of, oh, I had no idea we had to do it that way, or I didn't know we did it that way, or no, we actually don't do it that way. So first of all, it's getting everybody to the same place and understanding what it is that we do to add value to our code as we go onto the path of production and get it out there and put it into the hands of customers. And this is a little bit of an eye chart, but the point I wanted to make here is really this kind of thought bubble here, which really says there's a lead time of 120 days versus a process time of 39 days, which means there's work sitting idle for 84 days. This is a lot of what value stream mapping is about. It's really about keeping track of how much time are we spending, and of that time, how much of that time are we spending actually adding value, as opposed to things are sitting around, or we're waiting for decisions, or we're having meetings, or all of those kinds of things. And this is actually, I would say, wildly optimistic that you have 39 days of process time and 123 days of elapsed time or lead time. Usually it's like a 10-to-1 ratio, right? I had a conversation with somebody once, and I said, oh yeah, they just did a value stream exercise, and 90% of the time was wasted, and I thought that was awful. And the person I was talking to said, oh man, usually it's around 95%, so they're actually doing pretty good. But the key thing about this is get all the stakeholders in the room, understand from beginning to end what it takes to get software out the door. How you decide what to build, how you build it, how you run it, how you fix problems, how you monitor, all of those things, right? Incredibly important that everybody understand what that process is. Otherwise, you're just not going to get anywhere. Next, you really want to take that and you want to put it into some sort of pipeline system, right? And have a way that you can really turn this into an executable value stream, right? This is the place where we all go, where the tribal knowledge is encoded, right? This is how we deliver software, right? And everybody kind of converges on that as the shared artifact for how we collaborate on all of these things. And it should be mutable, right? So if we decide to change how we do something, that gets reflected, right? And it should capture as well, not just kind of all the stuff that we automate, but manual stuff as well, because that's really critical when it comes to metrics, right? So here's just an example of a typical release pipeline, right? You've got a this is a little bit of a linear thing, right? But you have your dev stage and your QA stages and staging and production, and you do your builds and all of these things. So kind of a typical thing, right? A little bit kind of tech-centric here, but the idea being, you're going to have things like automated or manual approval gates, right? You don't get out of dev until you have this amount of code coverage or this amount of build or test success, or until you finish all of these epics or those kinds of things. And then you'll have similar kinds of things that you do as you go across. And when you model this, you really want to be as comprehensive as you can possibly be, right? You really don't want to leave anything out. In particular, don't leave out any of the manual steps that you take, right? Whether it's, and I'll give you an example, kind of what I think about this. I just have to keep an eye on the time here a little bit, because I usually do this talk in an hour, and today I have 30 minutes. So what you want to think about is, what are all the things that you do, right? So if somebody comes to you and says, oh yeah, we automate all of our testing, dig in on that and do that as part of the value stream exercise. What does that mean, right? What that typically means, I'll tell you, is you don't really automate very much of the testing at all, right? What that typically means is, well, I submit a ticket to the IT team to get an environment stood up, and then I wait for that to come back. And then once I have that, then I submit another ticket for somebody to deploy a version of the application into that environment, and then I wait for that to happen, right? And then I can push the button on my automated test system to do the testing, right? So you have these sort of silos of automation or silos of manual work where, in fact, you could have done all that automatically, right? The second the CI system finishes, You stand up a new environment automatically, you deploy the application into there, and you automatically trigger the testing, and then the results are gathered and you move on, right? That's how you get from where you spend 10 days to do that to where you spend a day to do that, right? Is you really have to investigate what people talk about when they talk about automation and so on. And that's why capturing all of the manual steps is incredibly important, because once you do that and you start to measure that, you'll have an idea of where you're spending your time and where you're losing your time. Right? And cycle time obviously is something that we're all, very concerned about if for multiple reasons, right? It could be time to market. We want to get our product or feature out there quicker, or we may want to use that time more productively. Maybe we do more testing, maybe we do more performance analysis, maybe we spend more time up front on architecture. Whatever way you want to use that time that you get back is very important. And you really want to kind of start to focus on automating approval gates. Anytime you get to a part in the process where it sits there waiting for somebody to, bang the big red stamp on the piece of paper, either literally or metaphorically, those are the kinds of things you want to evaluate for, can we automate that, right? You shouldn't have to get 50 people in a room or on a conference call to decide whether or not your code coverage is adequate, right? You don't need 50 pairs of eyes on a spreadsheet to say that that's greater than or equal to 75% or whatever the number is. Actually, if you're doing 75%, you're doing really well. But So you want to really think about where are you losing time, and then in terms of how you scale this to a larger organization, trying to do as much of this as possible as code. So where you have domain-specific languages that can help you with these things, that also works great if you're in a regulated industry, because now you actually have an artifact that you can version and change over time. And if you have, if you do an audit with your auditors and they say, hey, you need to insert this step, you need to make sure that you check this before you do that, you can then go to them the next week and say, okay, here exactly in our pipeline is where we added this. And of course you can do that just by pointing at the screen, but you can also at that point literally show them a code diff, right? And say, here's where we inserted the stage in the pipeline, where we do the thing that you asked for, and so on. And to simplify audit grossly, auditors really want two things, right? They want you to document what you do, and they want you to prove that you did what you document. Well, an executable pipeline, an executable value stream, if you will, the definition of that is the documentation of what you do. The runtime record of when you executed that is the proof that you did what you documented. So customers and people in the industry who rely on pipeline execution systems have a leg up in the audit industry, right? Because they have a mechanism of showing these things other than just words on a page, right? And that tends to work really well. And there is kind of a little bit of a built-in tension between audit and DevOps, right? Because we want to go faster, right? We want to deploy directly into production. We don't want to go through cabs and audit committees and all of these things on the way to production. We have something important to get out there and we want to get it out there now. The auditors are like, hold on a second, right? That's not how we do things. So you need to work with that, which is very important. A couple of words on organizational structures, because one of the things that a lot of people run into, and I sort of alluded to this in the beginning, is your organizational structure doesn't support doing DevOps or doesn't support doing continuous delivery, those kinds of things. And traditionally we've been in a very, kind of functional silos, right? We have our DBAs, we have our ops people, we have our coders, and they're all, they never talk to each other. They don't know each other's names. They don't go out for beers or lunch or anything. And over time we've evolved a little bit more to maybe sort of a matrix structure where you have a bunch of people that are working on a particular product that are now sucking resources from the various functional areas, the various functional silos to get stuff done. But that can be dangerous too, because all of a sudden some more important project comes along and you lose your resource and now you're stuck, right? So the evolution of the industry in many ways is to go to more of a product-aligned organization, right? And who here has heard the term full stack developer? Raise your hand. Okay, full stack developers don't exist. They're unicorns and they're a really bad idea because you burn people out if they have those skills. What you want are full stack teams, right? You want an entire team where you have the skills and the expertise and the experience that you need. You have access to your DBA, you have access to your security person, your architect, your coders, your designers, product owners, all of those kinds of things. That's really what this goes into a little bit. And then a little bit, I don't really know that I believe too much in this, but kind of this idea of an adaptive organization where as needs change and so on, that just sort of seems to take care of itself in my experience. But really the key here being, break down the silos. Because whenever we look at value streams, the big handoffs between silos. That's where the delays are introduced. That's where errors are introduced. All of those kinds of things. And the teams, kind of the two pizza teams, as Amazon calls them, are really almost always aligned around product, right? They own the whole problem. You build it, you run it, right? You built a piece of code, you wear the pager, right? Until that thing is stable and in production, and so on. And that turns out to be a much more effective way of doing things. And there is, if you go look at the IT Revolution website, they're a publisher. They do the DevOps Enterprise Summit, for example. They have lots of good papers on these kinds of things. And there's also a great book by Mick Karsten called Project to Product that talks a lot about this. And this is, I pulled this out a little bit just as an idea of, what is the difference between project-oriented or kind of siloed organizations versus product-oriented, right? And there are lots of differences. And I don't want to go into all the details here, just in the interest of time. But, how you fund something makes a big difference, right? If every time you have to go get funding for your product just to maintain it and move it along, that's kind of an inefficient use of your time. How do you measure success? How do you put the teams together? What's the culture, right? All of these things have a big impact on the success of software projects, right? There's an organization called DORA, DevOps Research Associates, I think they were called. They've since been acquired by Google, but they put out this thing every year called Accelerate, the State of DevOps report. And if you haven't read the State of DevOps report, that's a great tool to beat people over the head with who want evidence, data-based evidence on why this stuff works and how this stuff works. So the State of DevOps report, I highly recommend for that, and you'll see these kinds of materials in there. Going to pipeline metrics. So once you've got your pipeline and you've got your executable value stream, now one of the good things about this is because we're automating as much as possible here, we now have a stream of data that we can use for analytics, right? We know how long it took to complete a particular planning cycle. How long, between the time that the epic was created and when it was released for development to work on. How many epics have we completed work on, or user stories, or Kanban board items, or whatever the process that you use are. How successful are we at building this stuff? How successful are we at testing all of this stuff? And really one of the key things here is this stuff needs to be collected as a side effect of the automation and the executable pipeline, right? When your boss comes to you, when leadership or management or the pointy-haired boss or whatever comes and says, look, I need to see numbers. That shouldn't be a thing where you all of a sudden your heart skips a beat and you're like, well, crap. Now I have to spend the next week putting together a spreadsheet and a PowerPoint presentation. What it should be is, yeah, sure, go to this URL and go look at all the data, right? Because we're collecting that data as a side effect of our executable value stream that we put together that handles, a lot of the drudge work and a lot of the gazintas and gazautas of how we get the software out the door, the path to production, if you will. And again, when it comes down to auditing and governance and those kinds of things, there is a huge amount of value in the fact that this stuff gets collected as a side effect of the fact that it was automated, right? Nobody has to sit there and type this information in, which is a source of error or also a source of just malfeasance, quite frankly. It took us 3 weeks, but really we only worked on it for a week and a half. So I'm going to say we did a week and a half on this, right? No, you can't game the system that way, right? So collecting this metadata as a side effect of the automation is a really good way to ensure that you have quality of data when you look at the metrics and then make sometimes quite important decisions based on that. And you want to have different dashboards for different participants in the process, right? The leadership wants to look at a certain slice of it. Are we on time? Is it going to have the stuff that we need? The project managers want to look at what's our cadence? Are we is the process working? All of those kinds of things. So you really want to build out kind of different kinds of metrics and different dashboards for different audiences. One size does not fit all, for sure. Now, once you've got that, and maybe you've piloted it with one product team or a few product teams, and some organizations that we work with have they have 500 different products, right? Some internal, some external. So scaling this stuff up across an enterprise is a little bit of a daunting process. Pipelines as a service is one of the ways that we advocate doing that, right? And the idea really is, look, treat your pipeline as a product feature, right? I mean, that's really the simplest way I can put it. Or a slightly different way to put it is, if you think back to when we delivered, mostly desktop software, right? What was the first thing that a customer typically would interact with in your product? The installer, right? And good companies with good products treated the installer as a first-class citizen in that product cycle. Not so good products and product teams treated that as an afterthought and had, the intern go work on the installer, right? The installers are kind of this thing where nobody who should be doing it wants to do it, and everybody who wants to do it shouldn't be doing it. But really think about your executable pipeline, your value stream pipeline, as a little bit like the way you would think about your installer in the past, right? Now maybe you still have installers, so this is a little bit of a mixed message, but if we're talking about, say, web services, right? Because that really is the way that you will get the software to the point where your customers can now interact with it and get value from it, right? Just the same way that the installer was when I dropped the software onto my desktop or my laptop to run it. So incredibly important. Now, once you have that, and you've got 50 product teams and you want to onboard them, right? This is where being able to share components, share pipelines, shared best practices, all of those kinds of things become important. So you want to be as self-service as possible, right? Here's the way in the company that we do a deployment into JBoss. Here's how we do schema adjustments to this database or that database. Or here's the overall pipeline for an application release cycle. Here's the kind of the default pipeline for a patch release cycle or an emergency patch cycle, right? All of those kinds of things, so that you have a starting place for people to start with. So you don't have to kind of start from scratch every time and maybe bump your head on all the same beams that everybody else bumped their head on the first time, right? Before the sign that got put up that said, watch your head. And really part of that is kind of the sharing and the visibility and being able to take advantage of other people's learnings and not start from stage one, every time. And really, focus on, get stuff done, or as I wrote originally before somebody changed it, get shit done, right? What does a developer want to do? Write code. What does a designer want to do? Design. What does an ops person want to do? Run stuff. Right? Nobody wants to talk about process, think about process, focus on process, right? So the less you do that, the better, but at the same time, you can't ignore it because nothing's ever going to get done. And again, if you do this in a self-service way, right, then you don't have to have a big architecture committee meeting every time somebody wants to create a pipeline for a new product or for a new release or something like that, right? Because the self-service catalog, sort of by definition, is this is the way we do stuff, right? This is the way Bank X or insurance company Y or software company Z, this is how we do things. This is how we build, this is how we test, And it may not be one size fits all, right? There could be 15 different ways that we build, but here's how we do it if it's a Ruby app. Here's how we do it if it's a Java app. Here's how we do it if it's a microservice app that goes into Kubernetes. Here's how we do it if it's one of our monoliths that we're trying to chip away at and change a little bit. Here's how we do it if there's a mobile app involved. Here's how we do it if we got to talk to a messaging backend, right? So all of the things that ordinarily you'd spend a lot of time kind of spinning up when you start a new project or start a new release, just kind of make it as self-service as possible. Now it needs to be tweaked, right? You need to customize it. Not everybody is the same, and trying to shoehorn everyone in isn't going to make anybody happy, right? And then in terms of what do you focus on, right? Focus on automating the common stuff. If you know a little bit about your process and when your pain points are and where errors are introduced and so on, maybe consider that first, right? Or if you've done a value stream exercise and you realize, well, geez, provisioning and then deployment, that's where we wait days, right? And an example from one of our customers way back when, in the days of physical hardware, 6-week service level agreement to get a new system provisioned. They virtualized, went to virtual machines, and their new SLA for getting VMs provisioned, 6 weeks. So they changed the technology, but they didn't change the service level agreement at all. So they kind of missed the point of doing this in the first place. Now, they figured this out, right? Somebody eventually raised their hand and said, wait a minute, why are we waiting 6 weeks to provision something that really only takes 5 minutes to do? A lot of that had to do with self-service, because it was, well, we got to make sure that and this was a healthcare company, so there was HIPAA and IP and all of these things that people had to worry about. If we can do this as self-service, here's how we're going to make that work, right? And that way, you can't even choose something that isn't the right way to do it. And in their case, one of the things they had to pick between was, well, based on the data set that I want to load into this, the clinical data set that I want to load into this, I may or may not be able to run that in Amazon. I may have to run it inside the firewall, right? So those are the kinds of things that they would spend weeks on, right, in these meetings. Whereas, if you just go in and, Intel on the slide here, but just choose a few things and say, well, here's the data set, here's the kind of thing I need to do. Then all of a sudden at the end it says, well, guess what? You can't run that in Amazon. We're going to have to deploy that in our VMware infrastructure inside the firewall, right? And that's just kind of the way it has to be. And if you've got a bunch of scripts that do a lot of these functions for them, you can wrap them into this executable pipeline and have them invoked, right? Scripting isn't an evil thing. Somehow scripting has kind of been pushed away as this evil thing. Well, guess what? Nothing happens without scripting, right? If it's a single command line that you run, well, that's a script, right? It's a simple script, but a lot of these things happen through that, and a lot of the value that's been captured over the years is in there. You don't necessarily have to walk away from them. You might want to. They might be bad, poorly maintained, old, crufty, all of those things. But you may also be able to sort of parameterize them to allow for reuse and kind of make them more valuable for that, which is great. Some questions to ask yourself, just sort of as a big picture here as I wrap up. So can the team make large-scale changes to the design of its system without the permission of someone outside the team or depending on other teams, right? How autonomous is the team? The level of autonomy that your team has drastically affects how fast it can move. Can the team complete its work without fine-grained communication and coordination with people outside the team, right? If I have to rely on a silo that does product management or project management, that's somebody outside the team. Now I have to coordinate with them and get that resource assigned and potentially yanked away. That's not a good thing. Can the team deploy and release its product or service on demand independently of other services the product or service depends on? Again, how autonomous are you really from a technical perspective? Can the team do most of its testing on demand without requiring an integrated test environment, right? If there's an integrated test environment, typically there tends to be one of those and everybody's lining up to use it. Now, of course, you can have multiple of those environments, but if it's a snowflake environment that's been maintained and kind of as your pet as opposed to cattle, then you may not be able to replicate that very easily, right? So then you got to think about those kinds of things. Can the team perform deployments during normal business hours with negligible downtime? A lot of that goes into architecture and all of those kinds of things. But these are the kinds of questions that you want to ask yourself, and depending on the answer that you get back, you may have a lot or a little work to do. So just kind of summarizing. Map and model the value stream. Do that value stream mapping exercise, whether you do VSM directly or just some facsimile thereof. Get all the right people in the room to understand what your process is from the time that you have an idea to when it's in the customer's hands. Then put that executable pipeline together and then automatically track the performance of that, with almost zero work in terms of the side effects and metadata that you're collecting. And then if you want to scale this out across the org, make those kinds of pipelines available as a service and self-service for all the teams to use and get benefit from. Quick plug for the Devops Enterprise Summit in the UK coming up in late June. This is the kind of stuff that as opposed to me, I just talk about it, the actual practitioners of this kind of stuff will come and talk about their experiences and repeat experiences and those kinds of things. And then I think in October is the big Devops Enterprise Summit in Las Vegas, so check that out too. Great conference. Probably don't have much time for Q&A, but I'll be happy to answer any questions while I break down or even afterwards. I don't want to encroach on the next speaker's time. So thank you very much.